Good day and welcome today to our webcast on visual storytelling and the art of infographics. Now, I understand we have some first-time attendees in the audience. Welcome. We hope you find this helpful in your work. And for those first-time attendees who may not know, we have a monthly blog on utility marketing and communications. We call it EEC Perspectives, and we encourage you to subscribe if you have not already done so. You can check our website for details. Now, before we get started, here's just a little bit about EEC for those of you who may not know. Simply put, we're a national content creation company working exclusively with utilities. It builds on my 20 years experience in the industry, and we have written content for clients across the country, mostly utilities, various things, annual reports, customer newsletters, utility websites, and so on. Now, we have blogged frequently in the past on the need for more of a storytelling ethos among communicators. Having worked in the utility, I know it's a very fact-intensive environment. Lots of facts, lots of analytics. I think sometimes we run the risk of losing story. So I'm a wordsmith, as most of you know, although I do create art in Excel from time to time. That sort of thing can make creative people a little bit nervous. Well, fortunately, we have great creative people on the call today. I've been pleased to work with Green Acres Creative for about 2 years now on a number of different utility projects for different clients. And I thought of them immediately when the votes came in at our last web conference for something on visual storytelling and infographics. So today we'll be joined by Andrew Oakes, who's the founder and creative director of Green Acres Creative. And they're based in Redlands, Southern California. Curtis Bailey is a project manager. He will also speak this morning. And then we also have Theo Hart, who's a designer. And we'll have Q&A after the presentations. Now, before we get to their opening remarks, just a couple of housekeeping items. We started these webcasts about a year ago because COVID had made in-person meetings not possible. But our practitioners need to interact and learn from each other and learn best practices. So we did this basically as a way to get around COVID. People have told us that they found these webcasts helpful to the degree that we focus on practitioner needs, real life situations. So we're going to do that today for sure. The webcast is being recorded. It'll be posted to the website. It will be shared with members of the audience as well as all the subscribers to our webcast. We do encourage you to send questions to us. You can use the Zoom screen button at the bottom. Please send them in when they come to mind, and we'll answer them as many as we can. We may go long today. We have a number of attendees and also received a number of questions in advance. We are going to have 2 polling questions, mostly icebreaker questions to let everyone know where we are, where each of us is on a continuum. So we'll be getting to the first poll question in just a moment. And I do ask if you would please help us get better by completing the survey at the end of this webcast. This webcast today derived directly from your votes on the last webcast. So please don't minimize the importance of that. Well, with that, I'm going to turn the wheel over to Andrew. Andrew, take it away.
Okay, thank you, John. Let me pull up the screen here just a second. Okay, great. Well, thank you for inviting us here, Janet and John. We're happy to be here to talk about this, and it's been fun preparing this for everybody because we love talking about storytelling and, of course, art and infographics. So the title of our story today is Visual Storytelling and the Art of Infographics. So it wouldn't be, a good story without telling you what we're going to tell you first, and then we're going to tell you, and then we're going to tell you what we told you. So we're going to talk a little bit today, about stories. We're going to show you some of our work. We're going to tell you what not to do, give some bad examples of infographics, as well as some graphic resources to help you along the way, whether you're producing stuff in-house or working with an exterior designer or what have you, some of the more professional tools versus some of the tools that are, more accessible. So what is story? Story is fact, plus a little bit of emotion. And a fun way to kind of illustrate this, or something, people have used for a long time, is the queen died and then the king died. That's all fact, right? Of grief. And that's where the emotion comes in. And, all stories, good stories, have emotion. Those movies that we walk away from and go, that movie might have actually changed my life, or that movie really moved me. It's that emotive part that is what we are attracted to as human beings. So story is extremely important. Where did it all begin? And so, thousands of years ago, we're sitting around the fire doing our arts and crafts, preparing for the next day, what have you. You can bet we were sharing, what life was about. And ultimately, it was shared, verbally in stories. And after that, we started to write, and written or visual tradition became apparent in history. And we started to jot things down as to, those things that were important. And what were they important for? And, in this case, most stories start with some kind of conflict. And so ultimately, when you start to think about that and you think back in the past, what that conflict was, it was, fighting off the neighborhood saber-toothed tiger, trying to stay warm at night, or maybe just, teaching each other how to fashion a club, because of course we didn't have Instacart to be able to, capture dinner for that evening. It was a pretty popular tool once that tool came into effect and we were able to share that with other people. So, how do stories help? Stories gave humans this evolutionary advantage, because stories help the listener or viewer literally survive, okay? And figure things out, solve problems, learn skills, and kind of in this tertiary way and in a much deeper way, I think, resolve some sort of anxiety, because all of those things we just looked at, food, hunger, shelter, warmth, all of those things, obviously we're about survival. And if you don't know what's stirring in the bushes next to you, you probably should have a good direction or idea of what you're going to do next. So let's get cosmic here for a moment. Let's fast forward a little bit, a few millennia. A public opinion poll released in 2020 by the American Psychiatric Association said 62% of Americans feel more anxious than they did at this time last year. Go figure, right? And compare that to the previous 3 years, which ranged between 32% and 39%. That's almost double. So this is one of those times in history that we got to live through that, anxiety was at, some of its highest levels. And we were starting to question humanity and this earth and, a pandemic. We had never been through that before. And obviously that causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of, internal struggle. And so who are these people? We have to consider, what are our customers going through at this point in time? And, that 62% of Americans, those are our customers, of course. They're the people from all different walks of life that we as communicators are in a relationship with, right? So as communicators, how can we help? We can be empathetic to our customers' stories. We can understand that we might be able to alleviate some of their stress or anxiety by something we have to offer. And lastly, use storytelling techniques to better communicate to our customers. So I said I would never do this. I said I would never ever use Lord of the Rings in a presentation, but here I am, I'm doing it. And it's just too perfect. It's just too easy, right? Because we know this story, we know the players, we know the characters, we know how it goes. It's a fantastic journey. It's got an amazing plot, all of those things. And so I'm going to use it to illustrate some things that we need to talk about as far as, what are those elements of story? What are the things that we can think on a deeper level about in our communications and how we're going to, tell that story to our customer? So every good story has a plot. you know, and how that story unfolds. And it starts there in the Shire in the bottom left-hand corner, moves its way up to Mordor at the climax. And then, of course, you know, there's a resolution and a transformation that happens with Frodo as he goes through this rising action, falling action, and goes through this very, you know, what I was going to say, sort of plot strategy here that we see in a lot of movies. So obviously we need a protagonist, we need a main character, right, for any movie to happen. And we need that main character because it's the one who moves things along. That main character and that protagonist is the one that ultimately drives that story. When we were looking at the plot, he was the one that, you know, the rising action brought down to the falling action, and we followed him through this entire journey that he was going on. But along this journey, he wasn't alone. He had, you know, obviously this benevolent, you know, fiery beast on the right-hand side, but he also had guides and wise counsel and faithful friends and an untrustworthy guide. But there were people that surrounded him, and there was these deeper things that were driving, you know, decisions that he made as well. So, you know, we always have to remember that, you know, any story has, you know, a problem, a difficult goal for the protagonist to achieve. And so ultimately, you know, again, sitting in that Shire, having to make this, you know, long journey and all the way to Mordor, that doesn't look great over there on the right-hand side. And it doesn't look like something he wants to take on, right? But he's taken this journey now, gained some strength, gained some confidence, and ultimately he's working his way through the plot. And that's what happens. There's a transformation there. So that's kind of the so what moment, you know, how this protagonist changes as a result and becomes, you know, a bigger character, right? But where do we normally go wrong in this storytelling process? We normally go wrong in the storytelling process because we fancy ourselves the protagonist. And it's really, really easy for us to do that because, you know, we have programs, we have rebates, we have all these things as you know, utility industry people that we want to help our customers, right? We've got good things. But we have to remember that, you know, the story is not about us, the story is about them. And as we remember, you know, back to a couple other slides is the protagonist is the one that moves things along, right? We're not the one that can move things along. And so you've got to remember that in the storytelling process, that they are the ones that are actually going on this journey, not us. You can't force that customer through the sales or adoption funnel. Customers are the ones who decide to make the decision, not you. So they're always the one driving the plot. So let's leave Middle Earth and take on a real life quest. Meet John. We want John to take advantage of our COVID-19 bill relief program, okay? He's happy now, but you know, he is a little bit skeptical. So we have to somehow communicate to John that this program, this quest, right? And we liken it back to that quest. We liken it back to the fact that John is our protagonist, you know, that it's something worth pursuing, right? And remember, we can't push John through this adoption funnel. John has to make that decision for himself. And so let's think of John as the protagonist, right? And so down in the bottom left, everything's going great. In 2019, John's a production assistant in Hollywood, California, and things are going really well. However, 2020 comes around, the rising action starts, COVID hits, and enter conflict. Because remember, we had to have some sort of conflict as part of the story. So John obviously is surprised. Now he's disappointed. And now, you know, we've reached this climax point where, you know, frankly, things are getting a little scary. You know, he hasn't worked now for 6 months. And bills are starting to pile up, and he's, you know, all he knows how to do is be this production assistant. He doesn't have any other options at this point. And here we step in as the utility and are going, hey, we have some options for you, right? And so he's still a little skeptical. He takes advantage of it. And finally, this resolution and transformation, and he's happy. He's taken advantage of our COVID relief program. But, you know, this is just the plot. So we've seen this, you know, diagram before from the Lord of the Rings, you know, and up at the top was Gandalf. Now Gandalf is the public utility, the wise counsel. You know, the guide is no longer The guy that was before, it's now John's mom, and she's seen something from the utility that can help John, but he's still, he's got some past experiences, he's got an upbringing, he's got pride, he's got all these things that maybe that's his opponent, right? And so the opponent, is not necessarily something that we see on the surface. It's like thinking about, in this case, a competitor. That's not, John's pride is, his competitor in this case. And when we think about our audience and we think about competitors, or we think about reasons why they're not taking advantage of these things, we have to, think about the fact that there's reasons why, there's a pain point why they're not taking advantage of these programs that we feel like are so beneficial to them. But all the players are exactly the same as in a classic story. We just have to think through it. We have to think deeper into that relationship that John has with our product or service. So we kind of have to become the mentor, right? And John has to become the protege. And in the end, give him all of the credit, okay? So let's get practical for a moment. How can we use visual storytelling in our communications to help our customers along their journeys? So, we're visual people here at Green Acres. This is what we do. This is how we think. I have to write. My wife talks in words. I say, write it down. I will not be able to understand it unless you write it down. And I have to visualize things. So here we normally are starting with a visual. And that's kind of counterproductive in some ways with, a lot of the clients that we work with, because they might be very analytical. They might be extremely numbers driven, and we're coming at it from a different perspective. But, kind of looking at this graphic here, it's already got a feeling to it. There's already, an inherent kind of story here. We don't know what that story is yet, but there's something going on. And there's an embrace, and there's a mother and a child, and we're starting from somewhere that elicits an emotion. Okay, so let's put this into practical sense here. We're going to build an ad here in a couple minutes. So one of the things that we do, and kind of the process that we go through here is we're always talking about focusing on the customer's needs, and I don't think that's anything that's foreign to any of us in this conversation here today. But we have to make it happen, practically on the page or on the website or in social media or wherever that's going to go. And so focusing on that customer's need, now that we've matched this headline with this graphic, saying because taking care of them is your bottom line, we're focusing on their need, and we're starting to build a communication. So the next thing is understanding the customer's need to understand themselves. And so, at the bottom of this little deck here underneath the headline, it says we've expanded our billing assistance so you can focus on what matters most. And we're trying to get to the psychology and the heart of it here that, obviously the customer understands the need for this, COVID relief, right? And in the form of, the bill relief, but, we're actually saying, we're focusing on you, as well as we're understanding and helping you understand yourself by saying what matters most. And they have to think about that, right? They have to internalize that. And so then, along this quest, identifying the challenge they will face on this quest. And in this case, it's low-income residential assistance program. And, does that really sound like a quest to have to walk through this? But it really is. We have to take advantage of these things. Think about all the things that come to you as a communication that is good for you, but you don't take advantage of it. How is that marketer, or how is that brand, going to finally break through to where you take those steps? And these are pretty simple steps, and we're telling them, here's what your journey is about. Starting October 1st, 2021, this program's, going to be available, and it's going to go through the end of January, to January 31st. And we're kind of setting the stage, right? We're setting the stage for that journey. And we're identifying kind of what those challenges are. They might not be huge challenges in this case. They're still challenges. We have to like identify that, as well as acknowledge that in our communications. And so the next one is, educate the customer and point them in the right direction, give them all the options, and of course, concentrate on benefits. Features are one thing, we build features, or I should say you build features in your programs, as utility people, but we always want to concentrate on those benefits because people are, in some way we're all pretty narcissistic, right? We're all, what's in it for me, and what am I going to derive from this, and how is it going to be specific to my needs? Give the customer the necessary tools to overcome those challenges. We've got a QR code, we've got for more information, and we're giving them that sword, if you will, that we saw Frodo carry into his journey. And even though it's obviously not that dramatic, but not being able to pay your bill because you've lost your job because of COVID is dramatic, right? This is real life stuff. So at the end, always add a heart, always add a heart. And I'm kind of kidding about that, right? But in a way, we're doing a couple different things here. We're building bespoke art that works with, the art that we're working with up at the top there. It all feels like it goes together and is done from the same hand. Everything that you see here as art feels very humanistic. It's not, angular. It's very kind of amorphous. It's got these good, simple lines. The typography isn't hard, and it's got a feeling to it. And that's visual storytelling for us as an agency. We're always going to try to make work that, because we know all of these visual elements carry baggage with it, right? Good or bad. And ultimately, your viewer's going to get an impression from that. And so in this case, we decided to work with something that's very humanistic. And in the end, kind of that little footnote of the heart pointing to, in this case, the city of Burbank Water and Power, saying, we're the one that's going to help you with the solution, but we've given you all the tools to make this journey, okay? So to recap, I told you I was going to do this. Tell them what you told them, right? That's good storytelling. So 3 key takeaway areas. Story is a highly effective way to communicate and connect with your customers, and whether that is thousands of years ago or today, we all, anthropomorphically have not changed that much. We still love sitting around a campfire, right? Who doesn't love doing that? Sharing stories, talking, connecting, communicating. And so, we haven't evolved that much in that sense. Storytelling is still important. Don't make yourself, the protagonist. Always make that customer the protagonist and try to walk through their story. This is a very easy thing for us to do and kind of forget. And then, of course, approach each communication with a strategy, and a plan to help your customer through their quest, through their journey, and, what's that plot look like? And try to figure out, how they came to this situation, or what, how we can help them as the mentor. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. And I particularly liked your point about we have to start by understanding where the focuses are, the forces are that are acting on our customers, and that we are not the protagonist, they are the protagonist. We did have a question I'd like to toss to you before we go to our next speaker, and that is, how can we manage the challenges of starting with art as opposed to starting with words? So did you want to take a swing at that?
Well, I guess kind of like I mentioned earlier, I'm a visual person. My background, I'm an agency owner, but started as a classic graphic designer, and I've always just, seen things. I think, if you're talking to me, I'm probably visualizing in my head, you know what I mean? And so that's generally the way that I'm going to solve problems. But I think early on as a designer, I really did fall in love with words as well. And I think a lot of designers, kind of go down this route that they see these two things synonymously, and that you can't take one without the other. So it's always been something for me that, like I showed that picture of the mother and the child embrace, we could put a bunch of different headlines to that, right? but it's got to be the exact right headline for that specific communication, and that's where words come in. There's a really beautiful movie called Art and Copy, which I would encourage anybody to see, but it talks about the kind of genesis of putting the art director and the copywriter in the same room together for the very first time in the late 1950s and saying, you guys figure it out. Whereas before it was, the copy was sent up to the second floor and the designer put, art to it. So I think those two things, now people are collaborating a lot more in that process. I think as a firm, we are looking to our clients, a lot of times to bring those words, and we're going to put the look and feel to them. But we're always going to step in halfway through and say, well, maybe this is a better deck. Maybe this is a better headline. Maybe, we use this as the pull quote. Maybe we, support this bit of information, because as we read it, we get inspired, we get insight from what writers write. And we have to dig in and look for the sort of nuggets in a story or a communication to find a good solution. There was probably, I don't know, 15 different, solutions before we came up with that one that we just looked at right now. I think Curtis is going to touch a little bit on in his presentation next, starting with really rudimentary shapes to form this flow chart kind of thing, to then push that story forward to the subject matter experts, right? Because we've got to get that stuff right from the very beginning before we put a lot of fancy frosting on it and make it look pretty. I think we're inspired by the images, but we have to use words in conjunction with that, and ultimately, you can't just push an image, I think, up the ladder or up the chain of command, so to speak, and expect that everybody's going to understand your vision. You have to put those things together, and it has to be more of a complete picture. So like when we're doing concepts, we have to make sure that in general, for a concept to be pushed up for people to approve it, we've got to have an image, we've got to have a headline, and generally a deck, that is going to show how all of this is going to be supported as a complete communication. Because it's easy to have words and it's easy to have images, but all that stuff has to work together.
So it sounds like the best way to accomplish that, rather than follow the process sequentially, words, then it goes to the art, then it goes somewhere else, maybe collaboration and getting more people involved at the front end. Yes?
Yeah, because like I said, I think it all has to work. And some people are word people and some people are visual people. Then you put those two things together and you got the best of both worlds, right? And that's all the best communications and advertising that I think us as marketers and communications people, we're attracted to. If it hits the point quickly and then makes us feel something because there's story involved, right? That's the best formula. If it's, if we say dog and we see a picture of a dog, there's no emotion there, right? It's got to get deeper than that. So just because we're pulling them together doesn't mean they're going to create any sort of story or emotion, but that's the next layer.
Got it. Okay, thank you, Andrew. And now we're going to have Curtis share a few thoughts. Curtis, take it away.
All right, good morning. Thank you, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, are we doing good? Can everybody see that? All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about answering this question. What is an infograph? Well, put as basically as possible, infographs are a combination of information plus some kind of visualization, something that gives the information context so that it's easier to understand. There's lots of different ways to make an infograph. Some of the most basic types you're already likely to be familiar with, like pie charts and bar graphs. All these things count as infographics. But infographics can take different forms or be based on different types of information. Things like lists can be turned into infographics of their own kind. You can do ones that are based on comparisons between two or more things, or flowcharts qualify as infographics. And to go a little deeper on that, we'll look at an example of a flowchart that Greenacres made for one of our clients. This here is the water story for Burbank Water and Power. This was published in one of their newsletters, and its goal was to guide the protagonist here in the upper left-hand corner, this Burbank resident who doesn't know how the city gets its water, and we're the guide to take them through that process of understanding, where it comes from, how it's processed, and the important steps that the city is taking to making sure that it's clean and all that sort of thing. So, but you might be wondering, how did we get here? How did we arrive at that big illustration with all those details and all that information? Like many things of this sort, Andrew was just mentioning this, it starts with a sketch. You've got to have some kind of initial basic layout so that you can start to wrap your head around the relationships between all the elements, because if you don't understand it, you can't communicate it to your customers. And so this is an important first step. And it's worth noting that this illustration, we liked it so much. John Egan was the one who put this illustration together, and we put it on the fridge at the office at Greenacres because we just thought it was too special. So but the illustration did have to be improved on. So we took that and started putting together these slightly more rudimentary diagrams of the relationships. And again, as Andrew mentioned, this was for the purposes of getting internal approval with Burbank so that they could say, yes, this is accurate. This represents all the relationships correctly, or no, we need to do a little tweaking here and there. And it went through a couple iterations until we arrived at this, which I believe was the final one that kind of solidified, yes, this is accurate. Let's move forward with this. So the next step for us was to take that and start turning it into what would become the eventual layout on the spread across 2 pages of the newsletter. And it was just a matter of taking those approved elements and layering them in and figuring out, where are things going to go and what's the best way to tell this story so that it's direct and not confusing. And it went through multiple iterations as we started to build up different layers of the illustration. Sometimes because of new problems that would emerge, we would have to shuffle things around. So some of the relationships changed. And it was just a matter of just more going back and forth with Burbank to ensure that we were getting things accurate as they talked to their subject matter experts until we kind of almost zero in on the final one here. And then with some additional tweaks, we landed here on the final version of the water story that made everyone satisfied and that we felt would be good, solid communication for the residents. Next up is going to be how we built the elements using art style and structure. So we start with a clean background using really basic shapes like circles, rectangles, etc. This is just to make sure that it's not obtrusive, since it's not really the focus of what this illustration is about. Then we start layering in more illustrated elements that mostly used basic shapes and neutral colors for simplicity. But we could also take it a step further when there was opportunities to personalize the illustration. We took advantage of that. Like this instance of Burbank City Hall here. And this is just one of those things that, again, is designed to make this feel personalized and that the utility is a part of this community. And they're not just pulling things in from all these outside sources and kind of regurgitating them back to the customer. This is our Burbank and we care about it. And so that's one of those things that's always really important to us. Next up, the water pipes are a main part of this story. They're the road that our protagonist is traveling along. And so they're color coded, and that's to stand out against many of the other illustrated elements, but also because it's going to relate to a legend that gets put into the illustration so that they understand the different types of water processing and sources and that kind of thing. And then tertiary elements are added to fill out the illustration, but again, these primarily use muted or neutral colors because they're not the focus of the story. And then it's completed here with the addition of the labeling. The numbered parts of the story are purposely using a gold color to be highlighted because we wanted to make sure that it was pretty much something that you really didn't see anywhere else in the illustration. So since those are the important stages of the journey, we wanted to make sure that they stood out. Next up is going to be a little bit about planning the layout using these concepts of grouping and separating. So here's the illustration with all of the background elements and labels and all that other stuff removed, just so you can see the kind of spatial relationship between everything. And it was important to us that the first three main story elements are grouped together on this left-hand page because we wanted to respect the way that people normally read spreads in magazines or newsletters or what have you. And you start at the upper left and you go down that left-hand page first. We didn't want them to have to zip back and forth between the left hand and the right hand page. That would feel a little bit counterintuitive. So we started with this. That was an important grouping principle right there. Next up, Los Angeles is a secondary or side stop in this story. So to emphasize that, it's been separated away from all the Burbank elements up there in the upper right-hand corner. And then finally, the ending stages of this journey with Burbank, that's the most important and most relevant to the reader. So this really big landmass was designed to group them together and really make them the most prominent elements of the story. And again, that's part of relating to the reader as a Burbank resident. That's you're part of the story where this water ends up and how it gets used to irrigate public lands and come out of your tap for drinking. That's the important part of this story. So, and that is it. That is how we arrived at the completed version of the Burbank water story. Thank you.
Curtis, thank you. It's not all that different from the original sketch, don't you think?
Oh, nearly identical. Perfect.
We had a lot of fun with that last summer. And a point I wanted to emphasize is the iterative nature. If you're going to be visual communicators, you really do have to be in it for the iterative process. I think you went through 5 drafts, Curtis, is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, and there was probably some that I didn't include just for the sake of brevity.
Well, we want to let the listeners know we're going to go long. We're going to go beyond the top of the hour, mostly because we have 3 smart gentlemen here with us and a lot of questions. Before I go to our next poll, Curtis, I did want to ask you a quick question that just came in. And that was, since you were all about the art elements, the question is, where do you find your art? Is there a stock agency or do you create it all yourself in-house using what tools?
It varies a little bit, and Theo is going to be addressing this in his presentation, so I'll leave most of that to be covered there. But for the water story in particular, the one I was just showing you, all of that is bespoke illustration, things that we created in-house. But there are definitely projects where that's not the right solution, because it usually ends up taking a little bit more time. I have to do a lot more back and forth for the approval. So going with stock imagery is definitely a good way to easily get everyone on board with what the visual is going to be, and oftentimes can be the most cost effective. So.
Okay, good. Sorry, Theo, if I stole some of your thunder. Hopefully we'll get that back. But again, do want to reassure the listeners, we are going to go beyond the top of the hour, and we appreciate you staying with us. You take us home now, Theo.
All right. Share my screen. So, hi, my name is Theo DeHart. I'm a designer at Green Acres Creative, and I'm going to go over some common infographic mistakes. The first mistake that I want to talk about is not knowing who the graphic is for. People have a vast vastly different levels of data literacy. And when you're first conceiving that you want to use an infographic, you need to pick who you're designing it for. My first example is this tide chart, which is gorgeous and has a ton of information, but might not be super accessible for everybody. My next example is an example of 30 different shots. This is much more accessible, but might not be appropriate for some higher ups management types. So just pick the type you want carefully. The next issue that we see a lot is the numbers don't add up. You see this a lot with pie charts where the pie chart doesn't add up to 100%. In this example, it adds up to 188%. This would probably be better expressed as a bar chart with total numbers rather than percentages. Another common mistake people have when communicating data is choosing the wrong type of chart. This bar graph does equal 100% and is much easier to understand in a pie chart form. The best way to compare values is usually with a bar chart or a line graph. Line graphs are especially good to show how values change over time. If you want to show what makes up the parts of the whole, pie charts are excellent for that, as well as stacked bar charts and column charts to compare the different parts of different wholes. Another common mistake many infographic creators make is including too much information. This gets people lost in the weeds and will muddy your message. This infographic is gorgeous, but just has far too much information to really get any point across. Another common chart making sin is using scales that don't accurately reflect the data. We can see in this example on the left that 4 stick figures represent 43,000 nurses, but somehow a 3K increase is now represented by 28 nurses. This is common with people trying to really drive home a point, but can come off as dishonest. So make sure you're being honest with your graphics, because otherwise you're going to lose trust. And when making charts, it's important to always remember to prioritize clarity over aesthetics. We see this a lot with the placement of the axes. In this example, we have 2 y-axes on the left and the right, one showing the price of gold, the other showing the price of silver. And if we're trying to compare the prices, it can be difficult because the scales are so different. It'd be better to have the y-axis on the left here and then show the percentage of change rather than the total price. Which brings us to forcing the reader to work too much. The mark of an effective infographic is its ability to make complex information easy to understand and interesting at the same time. This graphic is supposed to show social media usage, but I've been staring at it for a while and I'm still not sure what exactly it's trying to tell me. It's overly complicated. Keep it simple. Finally, I want to go over some resources. As Curtis said, we do a lot of illustration ourselves, and we use Illustrator to do that. Illustrator also has some very robust graph and chart making tools that lets you import data so you can make precise charts and graphs and then turn those into visually stunning graphics. Great resource, but it is kind of expensive. And if this isn't your main gig, you probably want something a little easier to use. So we would suggest Canva. It's a powerful online design tool for infographics that allows you to create a variety of designs, even if you don't have much design knowledge. It does have some graph making tools with simple sliders that allow you to adjust the percentage. It also has a fairly large graphic and photo library that's available to use, and I believe it's mostly free. So it's a good resource. Next one is Engage, which is similar. It has lots of templates, reports, posters, promotions, and of course, infographics. And I kind of like the infographic tools on this one better because it does allow you to import an Excel file and be more precise with your numbers than Canva. And finally, Pick to Chart is similar to the last two, and it has a robust graphic tool that again lets you import your data, which I like a lot. Finally, when it comes to getting free photos, I suggest Unsplash. It's a user-supported, free to use, free to license. Sorry about that. Infographic site, good photos. Adobe Stock has paid photos and free photos. And we also have some free graphics. Just make sure to check the free menu option on the dropdown. That's it.
Theo, thank you. We have the questions are coming in fast and furious, and one I think directed to you, Theo. It just came in. Is there a rule of thumb in terms of how much copy and how much art should be in an infographic? I think you showed us an example of how not to do it with the nutrition diagram. I mean, that's the extreme version, but think about the water system graphic that you put together for Burbank, and maybe talk a little bit about, is there some kind of rule of thumb in terms of how many word clouds and how many words in a cloud?
I mean, I guess if you need a rule, the rule is enough to make it clear. And I know that's not a very satisfactory answer, but it's the truth. Like, there's no, like, you use 15 words for every picture. It really is an iterative process where we go back and forth and we talk to, experts and see if we're actually making that message clear. Unfortunately, it's just about like going through it and doing the work and going back and forth.
So it sounds like the rule of thumb is less is more.
Well, no, the correct amount is more.
I'm sorry, what?
Like, the correct amount is more, because sometimes you can have too little. So it's really about making sure you get it in front of people and making sure they understand your message. One good rule might be to make sure your graphic is clear is, can you get the gist of your infographic without any words? And then start adding on layer of words to get more clarity out of it.
Okay.
Can I piggyback on that, John?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things too is making a convention for where those words go. And, in Curtis's presentation, he mentioned, we saved the color yellow to be where the little markers were that walked the protagonist through the story. And each block of text was set next to each one of those in a really specific way. And human beings are really good at grouping, right? We group things really, really quickly visually. It's good Gestalt theory. And we didn't get into any of that today, but those grouping principles and separating principles, if you set up a convention and your audience can follow that, whether those words are all on the right-hand side and then they identify with something in the infographic, or they're set in the same, color, size, typeface, and weight and all those things, we group really, really quickly. It's like seeing a group of, people all dressed in black and then one person dressed in white. We automatically separate that person from the group, right? So we do the same thing with graphic elements. And when it comes to text, in this case, it might not be an issue of too much or too little, but if your audience can kind of see that layer, right, of text and then work around it, but they know it's always there when they need to, take advantage of it, then ultimately that helps the viewer to, grasp that graphic more quickly.
Okay. Janet?
Theo, we just got a question on chat. Could you share the web resources from that slide? Can you pop those? I think it was the resources for.
Yeah, a couple slides. There we go.
And the one before that. Yeah.
Okay.
And Kavia, I think, Canva, yeah.
Canva. Okay, good. Thank you, Janet. And we will be circulating the deck, of course, to everyone. So you'll have a chance to take a look at that again, to see where the resources are, whether they're free or whether you have to pay for them. Another question came in, Andrew, I think it's one has got your name on it. We've got a couple with Curtis's and Theo's name on it, but this one I think might be at a leadership kind of role. How do you get artists and writers to collaborate? I mean, is it a right brain, left brain sort of dilemma?
I don't think so. I think everybody's trying to tell the best story, you know, and people that work good together. I think it's a matter of style, you know. I think is probably when I'm doing a final pass through, I'm looking for tone. And when we talk in visual terms, a creative brief that could be written for a written piece versus a visual piece could all have the same words and use the same adjectives, and we all need to be on the same plate, you know, with those adjectives. Because, you know, if the creative brief says, you know, it's going to be puppies, kitties, and rainbows and unicorns, but then it comes out looking like Metallica, right? Then there's something went wrong. And so ultimately, I think the creative brief helps a lot because it is going to identify tone and message and look and feel and all of those things. So they should be synonymous with each other and working in conjunction. And I really, you know, to me, it's like there's subtleties, you know, in tone, and it's just changing. Maybe it's us maybe seeing something and working with a writer that we say, well, maybe this word or that word. And maybe a little more formal or less formal, but then that gets into the whole, you know, verbal branding strategy of a brand that we're working with. You know, one company that we're working with might not be as casual, and they might not accept that approach, whereas others say we want to be more friendly, approachable, and humanistic. And they say, gosh, we love what you're bringing to the table with this. We've always wanted to speak to our customers in a more casual, you know, way. And so, you know, we write and we, you know, but we do a whole lot more visual work, but we write a little. And, you know, like I said early on in this conversation, we're always trying to wrap our head around it on both ends, the art and the copy, because they have to go work together.
Right. So it goes back to the collaboration, as you say.
Yeah.
We have to talk about it. We have to collaborate. We have to surface assumptions and all of that. Good. Thank you. Curtis, we have one for you. And there's a reader or listener that's interested in learning more about the process of going from content to design. Now, you talked a little bit about that in your talk, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, and this will sound a little bit familiar based on what's been said in the presentation, but I think one of the most important early stages in the process is, you know, looking at what the information it is you're going to present and letting that drive what the visual implementation is going to be. Because, you know, sometimes we might, you know, that you can't put the proverbial square peg in the round hole, right? So I think that that's an important early stage of the process. But then, you know, I think this is one of those things that, you know, at least those of us that are designers learn all the time. But I suspect it's very similar when it comes to almost anything else, like program design, when you're figuring out, you know, what qualifications are going to be and all that kind of thing. Is that going through the process of it and trying to solve the problems is also part of what tells you what's going to work and what's not going to work. So again, it's one of those kind of things where there are definitely principles to follow, and some of the stuff that we've talked about today, like Andrew's comments about, emphasizing the protagonist, or the things that I mentioned about, grouping and separating. All of those are like, the guides. But which of those ends up being kind of like the main principle upon which a particular design might shift just varies, and it's something that you have to discover through the process. And like with everything else, open communication between us and whomever we're working with is a big part of landing on that. So
Right.
I hope that answers the question.
Okay.
And Andrew, as usual, wants to chime in.
Yeah, no, I think just to flavor that even more, the work speaks back to you as you're doing it.
Yeah.
Right? Like you get to one step and then it's going to tell you where your problem is. And then you get to the next step and it's going to illuminate another problem, and I think a lot of times if we're not working with a client that maybe has never put together a graphic that complex, that looks like a big scary thing. And ultimately, hopefully it's part of our job to just make those quick iterations to get it back to them to go, wow, this thing's actually happening. We're really doing this. We've wanted to do this water story for 15 years and we've never done it. Wow, it's actually happening, but that wasn't without the piece kind of speaking back to us and going, well, here's another problem we have to get through. Here's another visual solution we have to get to make sure that viewer knows. But we don't know all that stuff going in. We just have to take the dive and, hope the net appears, so to speak.
So all of that goes through not only collaboration, but allowing the process to play out of the artists, the writers, and so on. Good. And again, we will go past the top of the hour. Theo, here's one that came in for you. We use photos in emergency situations. If that is not possible, can you discuss how to visually communicate when there's a time-sensitive issue?
I think one of the best things you can do is prepare beforehand. For one of our clients, we've put together a bunch of stock illustrations for them for different emergencies that might arise. So like the power goes out, there's a power going out icon, different things like that. It's hard to say that it's be justified to create an infographic in an emergency. I think that that might actually hurt your message when it's an emergency. So prepare and maybe use like Canva or something like that, which will let you create quick graphics without having to go to an outside agency.
So preparation favors the prepared mind, as Pasteur once said.
Exactly.
We have another question. Could you, and I'm not sure who wants to take this, could you speak a bit about accessibility requirements around colors, fonts, sizes, and so on, and especially ensuring compliance when infographics are going online and in email newsletters, websites, and social media?
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit.
Okay.
So, I mean, accessibility could be its own webcast. It's a deep subject with a lot to learn, particularly on websites. There are some great tools built into Chrome that will audit your site to make sure that it's fully accessible. So I would suggest using those. If you're not sure how to do that, you just go up to the developer menu and you turn on online tools and then right click anywhere on the page and go to inspect element audits. And then you can go from there. As far as contrast and stuff like that, like if you're following the strict rules, the contrast needs to be real sharp. And so it's hard to create visual graphics that are 100% accessible. So that's where you need to be real careful with your words. And sometimes you're just not going to be able to make things that are 100% accessible. So back it up by writing it down, because if someone is completely blind, it doesn't matter how cool your graphics look or what the contrast is.
Good point. We've just had another come in, and I'm not sure who this one goes to, but is it ever effective to combine iconography with infographics? Who wants to take a swing at that?
I can take that. And iconography, I think I can also use the word symbols, right? And so I think it's fully appropriate. I think one of the examples Theo gave of what not to do, and it was talking about using a pie chart instead of a histogram, because it was talking about a whole object, but each one of those pictures in the histogram had a little icon on it, and that icon is a secondary identifier that allows the viewer to access that with the meaning, right, quicker. And so, I always liken that symbol conversation and an icon conversation, to a stop sign. When you pull up to a stop sign, the stop sign doesn't tell us all the reasons we're supposed to stop, right? And in 8-point type, it's a symbol that tells us we're supposed to stop, and it's an idea, right? And so ideas can happen that quick. Ideas, getting into like Gestalt theory and all that stuff, it's within milliseconds that we identify and can make sense of symbols and iconography versus, reading the written word. So ultimately those things, are ingrained in our psyche as human beings, and some of this stuff gets, very old in how we see things, whether it's a circle or a square, or it looks organic or non-organic, or all of those sort of things. But being able to identify something quickly, if it's going to help our infographic, why not,
Okay. We've had a question that came in also, and are there any other real world examples in PR practices of using storytelling and infographics? Now, we've talked a little bit about that today, but are there any other client examples, Green Acres folk, who that might be applicable here in terms of maybe how you got the client started to buy into visual storytelling, or how you created a process to guide it? Any other thoughts from the client engagements?
I can speak to that as well. I think it depends. Sometimes the client comes to us and says, we really want to show this in a more meaningful and visual way, and they've seen what we've done for other clients, and we're able to take it on from that direction. The other direction is somebody brings us 18 pages of copy and goes, here, and I always open up the conversation, because we want to solve things visually and give people places. And I think the way I think about it is to dip their toes. If you've got 18 pages of text, that's a pretty dense document, right? How do we spread that out? How do we make it more meaningful? How do we make it more exciting to engage with? And, ultimately, I liken it to just dipping your toes in the pool. There's always somebody who runs screaming from the back of the house and does a backflip into the pool, but there's only one of those guys at the party, right? And then there's your mother-in-law who goes, woo, 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 into the water when it's cold. But most people dip their toe in and go, yeah, okay, So how do we use infographics to allow people to dip their toe in? And so we're always trying to impress on clients. I think this bit of information right here could use a graphic. This chunk of, something that's very dense, we could put that in a more, manageable visual way that would be, much more appealing, engaging, and meaningful, because, part of that piece generally is to educate. And so I think it goes both ways,
Andrew, I know that one of the clients we've worked with together, just to build on that example, they wanted to promote energy efficiency programs and rebates And so, you know, the traditional way is for me to sit down and write 18 pages of copy and then hand it over to you. And that's actually, I think you intervened earlier in the process mercifully and said, you know, maybe we could show, since all of these programs tie into the home, why don't we start with a piece of art of the home, of a cross cut of the home, showing the different rooms and the different appliances that were eligible for rebates, whether it's lighting or whether it's HVAC or whether it's watering the lawn, so on and so forth. So, I mean, I think that was a case where when we worked together, we helped the client achieve something. I think that's more visual than copy intensive. At the end of the day, my 18 pages of copy, I'm just being facetious, but that's probably shrunk down to about a page because there were 10 different stations in the house where we wanted to just flag that there's a rebate opportunity for this and an upgrade opportunity for that.
Yeah, and two things. One, you know, like I said earlier, in that mistake of making ourselves the protagonist, right? We are a little narcissistic, and we want to see ourselves in whatever we're reading. And how does this appeal to me? You know, what good is this for me? And if you can see yourself in that house, and you can see your house as sort of this model, and you see and can identify all these areas that maybe you can use some help, that's a really nice way to walk yourself through a communication. And the second part of that is, you know, in this case, it was a big 2-page spread that had a kind of elevation of a home, and it had different rooms and stuff all the way out through the lawn and all the different ways that they could take advantage of these rebates. But I think the biggest thing was too is, you know, even though we're trying to, we have a storyline, we have a plot, we're trying to walk this protagonist from the top left to the bottom right, they're not always going to do that. And this gives them a place to make their own journey. And like I said earlier, right, we have to make them think they're the ones that got through it, and they're the ones that educated themselves. And then they feel good about that education, right? And that's really the way to, I think, to convince somebody to do that. You know, it's like convincing the boss that it was their idea, right? So in this case, we're helping our customer identify and learn about themselves. You know, I really do want to take advantage of this cistern rebate and gather water. I see my neighbor do it, but now I can see it in my own home, and now they're offering it to me, and let's take advantage of it, right? But it allows them to walk through this thing. And it's not, you know, most stories are linear, right? And writing is linear. And so putting an infographic together, or putting, you know, in this case, this big visual story together, it allows them to be non-linear. And in some ways it's more dynamic because they're having to interact with the work.
Right. They might just be interested in bathroom appliances this season. So
Right.
rather than force them to wade through 8 other programs before they get to bathroom appliances, by making them the protagonist, you really let them pick and choose. I thought you guys did a great job with that. So
I mean, it's synonymous with subheads in text.
mhm.
You know what I mean? Where you can an article could have multiple facets to it, but a subhead allows somebody to dip their toe in and get to the point that feels most relevant to them.
Right. Quickly skim.
Yeah.
Quickly skim.
Like captions.
Exactly. One of our listeners had a question about how do we sell this whole visual storytelling thing up the chain? Basically, they're going to need buy-in from someone at a higher level than them, maybe a VP, EVP, AGM, whatever. But you can't just go from a copy-intensive, say, newsletter or annual report to something that's all infographics. How do you get buy-in? Do you have any ideas on that?
Sure. I think it's one of those things that's kind of a show and tell sort of thing, you know, and I think a lot of times you have to put that sort of information or examples in front of somebody to say, this is what this other company has done, and I'd like to do the same thing. I think if you talk in the abstract and you don't bring, really specific examples with you to the table, it's much less accessible to the person you're trying to impress it upon. And ultimately, and we talked about this, I think, before the podcast here, is that, we deal with a lot of engineers. We deal with a lot of subject matter experts that are very analytical, that are very numbers driven, right? And so how do we, if they're numbers driven and they see numbers, and in my head, I see pictures, how do we, bring those two things together? And the only way that you can do it, it's the same way we work with clients, to get in the ballpark, right? It's the same way I would work with students, how do you get me in the ballpark? You know what I mean? And it's a quick way to make that communication to somebody if you can show them an example. And then maybe a quick, chain of events of how this is going to go. Let me take the chance on this, and I would guess, going that direction, or I should say, in our experience moving in that direction, where we walk into that conversation is we exhaust all of those arguments to begin with. And we think through that whole process of what that presentation is going to be like. And we sort of play devil's advocate to ourselves. What could this person ask us and how do we back it up? So exhausting all of those arguments before you walk in is probably the best strategy.
Okay. Well, thank you to the audience for so many great questions. We're going to sort of move towards the next steps, both for this webcast and for others. So I would ask everyone to please take the survey. We have lost a few people who had to go to the next meeting, but I do ask you to take the survey. Please tell us what worked and what didn't work. And most importantly, tell us what you'd like to hear in terms of new content. Yes, we are going to circulate a recording of the webcast to all the attendees, as well as the subscribers to our blog, and we will post it on the EEC website. By the way, under the resources tab, we've moved a few things around on the website, and we do have recordings from previous webcasts. So if you are just starting out with EEC, we encourage you to go to the resources tab and just check out archived webcasts. Now, we do have our next webcast scheduled already. It's going to be on November 17th, and it's going to be on ESG communications for utilities. And we're really happy to have a representative from Xcel Energy, as well as a former New York Times energy reporter as our speakers. Now, if the term ESG is unfamiliar to you, that could be a sign that you need to join us on the 17th of November. ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance, and it's basically driving the narrative, not just in the energy space, but across industries. So there are trillions and trillions of dollars of investment capital that are being directed based on companies' ESG performance. So I encourage you to dial in on the 17th and join us. With that, I think we're going to put up Green Acres' contact information so that they can hopefully make the phone ring. There's the email addresses. You can reach them at the phone number above. And with regard to any other last steps, I just want to thank Green Acres and our audience for asking some great questions, and Green Acres for giving great answers. So we'll see you on the 17th of November. If you have any questions you need to ask me, you know where to find me, right there. So with that, I will thank everyone again and pronounce this webcast over.